I am Curran Bhatia speaking with Eric Raskin. We, of course, know him as the managing editor, media director for usbets.com. He hosts the Showtime Boxing podcast, Gamble On podcast. He wrote about the moneymaker effect. We've seen your work everywhere. Eric, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. How are you, Curran?
Good. Doing great. And I'm excited to chat about the heavyweight championship of the world, one of the heavyweight championships of the world, because that's how it is in boxing, with multiple belts, as we all know. But Tyson Fury is going to be taking on Dillian Whyte across the pond. And I want to just chat with you, get your thoughts, ask you if there's any spots for value. So let's just start off with the fight itself before we even get into the odds. I mean, obviously Tyson Fury has to be the favorite because, we've seen what he's done with the Wilder trilogy. Where do you think each guy is at right now coming into this fight? Whyte did lose to Povetkin, but he avenged that. So he's also on the come up. So it's kind of like, it's something we like to see in heavyweight boxing. Two guys, on the way up. This isn't a comeback fight for either guy.
Right. This is not a super fight. It's not Fury versus Wilder or AJ or one of those that we dream of, but it's the next best thing I think the heavyweight division can provide, which is the legit champion against a legit contender. This isn't, Fury's had a few soft touches along the way, especially like right after he came back. The Schwartz is the one name, and Safari, and some of these guys who didn't belong in the same ring as him. That's not Dillian Whyte. Dillian Whyte is a threat. He's a quality heavyweight. He has quality wins. I think the one-punch uppercut loss to Alexander Povetkin is probably more fluky than indicative of who Dillian Whyte really is. This is a fight that has a clear favorite. There's champion versus contender, no doubt about it. But it should be competitive. Dillian Whyte is dangerous. He's a quality puncher. We've seen Tyson Fury at least hit the canvas plenty of times. So, this is what you want in a heavyweight title fight that is not quite your two best in the division colliding, but best in the division facing a legit top 5 or so contender.
Absolutely. This is what we wanted. And to your point about some of those guys, I mean, against Schwartz, at least Fury did knock him out in the second round. We know he had to go through a lot more when he took on Otto Wallin, but again, it was a gutsy win for him there. And when you look at Whyte, I mean, Whyte is really no slouch. I mean, he lost to Anthony Joshua. There's absolutely no shame to that, especially at that time when he lost to Joshua. I mean, Joshua was certainly on the come up. I mean, he looked like he was just going to be unstoppable for a long time. That's pre-losing to Ruiz, right? And pre-losing to Usyk for Joshua. So it wasn't, it was a different time back then. And then you lose to Povetkin, you get caught and you come back from that. So, to your point, it's champion versus challenger. But the skill level is not too far off, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the name that you mentioned of Otto Wallin is probably that's the closest to the level among people whom Tyson Fury has fought. Otto Wallin and Dillian Whyte are on a comparable level. And we saw Otto Wallin give Fury one hell of a tough fight, had him bloodied, extremely bloodied, won some rounds. Ultimately it was clear who won once the doctors and the refs let it go the full 12. No doubt Tyson Fury won that fight, but that was a tough fight. I think Whyte and Wallin are comparable level heavyweights here. Dillian Whyte, I don't think he quite has the skill to match up with Tyson Fury. If this is a boxing match, Tyson Fury is going to win it comprehensively, but he does have the come forward pressure, power. He has that sort of ability to make a real fight of it. If this is not a pure boxing match, if this is a fight, if they're exchanging punches, anything can happen, and Dillian Whyte becomes a pretty live underdog in this.
I mean, that's the thing about Tyson Fury. He can beat you in a couple of different ways, and we've seen him box and move. And for a 6'9" man, over 250 pounds, to be able to move the way he does is just insane. But then we've also seen where he uses his size, right? When he had his US debut in 2013 versus Steve Cunningham, even though he got dropped, he got up and he really leaned on Cunningham. He used that size to his advantage. And in the last two Wilder fights 2 and 3, he bulked up and he said, "I'm going to come at you." So it seems like there's just more in his arsenal, and Whyte, Whyte can drop you with a punch as well. It's not like he can't knock people out, but it seems like Fury can maybe do a little bit more. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned his weight. I think that's an interesting factor in this fight because we're chatting a little after the weigh-in has taken place, and Fury came in lighter for this. I don't have the exact poundage off the top of my head. But I know
264 for this
okay.
fight.
I was going to say low 260s. Yeah.
His last fight was versus Wilder. The trilogy was 277.
Right.
So definitely a drop off there. But yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, which I think I'm certain that's intentional with Fury. He seems to calculate all of these sort of things. He's got that incredibly high ring IQ. He's not coming in at 264 by accident. Clearly, that's by some design that he expects to use his legs a little more. So I would expect a little less of the lean on the guy approach and a little more of the get out of range, be herky jerky, make himself tough to hit. But he, as you said, he can do it either way. I think we were all shocked in that second Deontay Wilder fight by the way that Fury fought. We all expected him to box because in the first fight, boxing was what helped him bank all these rounds, and exchanging punches is what left him on the canvas twice and almost knocked out in the 12th round. So when he came out in the second fight and he had promised he was going to come forward and knock Deontay Wilder out, none of us believed him. We thought he was just talking. He was trying to confuse Wilder. And instead, he did exactly what he said he was going to do. But with the weight that he's coming in at here, I don't know that I would expect a similar game plan in this fight. But we know that he can do either. And that if he's struggling, if for whatever reason his plan A isn't working, Tyson Fury is the kind of rare heavyweight who has a really strong plan B and plan C type of option.
He's crazy enough to actually do what he says, to give away his game plan at a press conference and then actually do it. I mean, it's absolutely wild. That's what he did in the second fight.
Brilliant reverse psychology, really. The sort of the whole Princess Bride, the iocane powder. He's thinking of what the other guy is thinking, that he can't possibly mean what he says, and actually he does mean it.
It's like a high level game of liar's poker.
Right.
And you never know with Tyson Fury, but it seems like he's, thought about this stuff in terms of the weight. So if he's lower in weight now, maybe that's part of the game plan here. Before we get into the numbers and the odds of that main event, I just wanted to ask you about the undercard. To be fair, it's not the most spectacular undercard we've seen on a pay-per-view, and I think most people would agree with that. One name that is of interest and has been in the news recently is the half brother of Tyson Fury. That's Tommy Fury. Tommy Fury, 22 years old, 7-0. He's got 4 knockouts. In this fight, he's currently listed at a minus 4,500 favorite, so probably not much you can do there. And I think it's also tough because he has knocked a few opponents out, but he doesn't always get the knockout. He's maybe less than impressed in the last few fights, and he hasn't gotten the knockout in the last few fights. Anything you expect to see from Tommy Fury on this card? I mean, it is a big stage, and now he's past the whole Jake Paul thing. I mean, that could happen again in the future, but he's, back to, what you could call a regular normal fight, or however you want to phrase it.
Yeah. I mean, he's with a big last name that everyone recognizes. Other than that, he is your usual work in progress prospect getting these opportunities. But those odds that you mentioned, this fight to me is an absolute stay away. I don't see any reason to put money on, even as you said, there's some reasonable pricing on, will it be a knockout or will it be a decision? But it's kind of hard to pinpoint what we're going to see from Tommy Fury in that regard. I've only seen him fight in full once. I've seen some clips of some other fights, but the fight on the Jake Paul undercard last summer is the only full Tommy Fury fight that I've watched. And I think, like everyone, I came away very underwhelmed. We went into that fight thinking this is the guy that Jake Paul is going to step up against, and he's an actual professional boxer, so he should be favored if that fight happens. And then we got to see Tommy Fury, and we all came away, you know what? Maybe Jake Paul could beat this guy. I actually kind of hope that fight happens, in the sense that I find it interesting. I don't know that there's a clear favorite in that. And so if Tommy Fury wants that payday, perhaps it's still out there. But man, to watch this guy, both the way he looks, his physique, the way he fights, it's hard to believe that he and Tyson Fury came out of the same gene pool. There's really almost nothing but that last name binding these two guys. But yeah, I mean, he's a prospect. We shouldn't expect to see a finished product in the ring. If you view him through that lens, that we're just looking to see him gradually improve and work his way toward contender status, I think you have to set your expectations with him and not assume that just because he has this well-known last name, that he's actually a headline type fighter. He's not yet.
He's not yet. He's still trying to make his name in the boxing ring through his own merits. I actually think down the line, just as an aside, I think him versus Jake Paul would be a fantastic fight for both guys. It would give Jake Paul, fight someone who's in their prime, same size, who is a boxer by profession. And also for Jake Paul, someone like a Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., someone like that. But I still think Tommy Fury, should be in that mix. But let's talk. Well, I guess it depends on what happens tomorrow night. So let's talk. Right. Let's go back to the main event. Let's look at some numbers here. So, obviously the odds are spread out, but most places you can see Tyson Fury at like a minus 550, Dillian Whyte at a plus 400. What are your thoughts on those numbers? And also, I wanted to ask you, we know, what Tyson Fury has come back from in terms of mental health. I mean, he disappeared basically for many years. He gained, went up to 400 pounds, and, he's calling this his last fight. And so I'm just wondering about someone who is struggling with mental health, but then also doing a great job of being an advocate for working hard at mental health and bringing him back to that level. But at the same time, you never really know what's going to happen. And I'm just wondering, does that play when you're looking at a fight like this and looking to maybe make a play, does the mental aspect of each guy maybe come into consideration as you're making your picks?
I mean, you should consider everything before putting your money down. I think with Tyson Fury, that was more something I was concerned about his first few fights back. The first Wilder fight, certainly we weren't sure what Tyson Fury we were going to get. He was a small underdog actually entering that fight. At this point, we've seen him enough that he seems to be focused. I don't think his various mental health struggles are impacting the way that he performs in the ring. The retirement point, though, it is an interesting one. I don't quite know how to read that. I don't know how serious it is. He has retired once before, and as you said, was out of the game for, I think it was about 2.5 years, and then came back, blew up to 400 pounds in the meantime. Is he actually looking to retire after this fight? Is he going to temporarily retire, blow up in weight again, and then come back? Or is it just a negotiating ploy? I wouldn't rule that out, that he's waiting on the winner of the Anthony Joshua-Alexander Usyk rematch. If it's Usyk, maybe he's not that interested in that fight and he actually will be retired after this. But if it's Anthony Joshua, I can't see him turning away the money that would be involved in that. Not to mention it's a fight that I'm sure Tyson Fury is confident he would win. So this could be a negotiating tactic that, hey, Anthony Joshua, I'm retired. If you really want me that bad, give me the lion's share of the purse and maybe I'll come out of retirement for you. So it could be something to that extent. So I'm not sure how seriously to take it. But just as far as the mental health issues and how they affect the odds and the betting and what I'm expecting in this fight, at this point, I don't see those as a concern if you're looking to back Tyson Fury. And yeah, those odds, this is not a fight that interests me in terms of betting it straight up. If I had to, I would say I lean toward the Fury side, that minus 550 is the lowest price I'm seeing on Fury. I think that's reasonable value, that I am that confident that he wins this fight. But to me, this is more a fight where you're looking for some props, method of victory, perhaps a band of rounds. The two bets that I have placed are on Fury to win by knockout and Fury to win by knockout, specifically in rounds 7 through 12. I found prices at different sports books where I thought there was value on those. The 7 to 12 is the one that really interests me because as a sports bettor, you want to give yourself multiple outs, multiple options, multiple sports books, see what the different prices are and get the best price. And that's just interesting because KO 7 to 12 for Fury is anywhere from plus 150 to plus 175 at most books. And then I found one book that had it all the way up at plus 240. And that is just massive value for what I think is the most likely outcome, a second half of the fight knockout for Tyson Fury. So that's my personal favorite bet, is that 7 to 12 at plus 240. But there are a lot of different ways to bet this fight. I just don't see a whole lot of reason to bet either Fury to win straight up or Dillian Whyte to win straight up.
No, you broke it down great there. And I just want to say just my 2 cents about Tyson Fury with the mental health. I mean, he's been an advocate for, people struggling with mental health. And he absolutely deserves a ton of props of speaking about it openly, talking about some of the stuff that he does. He said he trains twice a day, right, to keep his mental health in check. He trains in the morning and then he needs to train again in the evening, because if he doesn't, then he feels those mental health struggles coming in. But in a way, if you look at his performance and what he's done in the ring, I mean, it's in a way, it's almost been a blessing in disguise, right? Because if that's something that keeps you in the gym, keeps you motivated, and then you're able to have success in your profession, which he's been able to do. I mean, he's on top of the heavyweight division right now, undefeated. So, that's worked out for him. So I applaud him for doing so. Just one more question about the whole motivation aspect that we're talking about and the whole retirement. A big part of Tyson Fury in terms of, achieving what he has achieved, he seems to be his best and most motivated when there is a huge prize there. And what I mean by that is, when he fought Vladimir Klitschko, that was an absolute, massive opportunity. Now, he didn't necessarily do that much, but Klitschko did even less. And that's still saying something, that when you go up against a champion who hasn't lost in 10 years, to at least have more success than that champion does at that time, that's something that, isn't easy to do. Then you look at when he was 400 pounds, there's a story about how he was walking because he couldn't even run. And he looked at his phone and he saw Deontay Wilder calling him out. And that led to that saga, that trilogy, where he definitely got the better of Wilder, right? The draw in the first fight and then knocked him out in the next two. The other part of it was the cherry on top was the Joshua fight. They were at one point had 2 fights signed. So again, that was something that I'm sure he would get himself up for and be motivated for. Dillian Whyte is a brilliant fighter, but in terms of that payday or that status, right? He's probably not what Wilder was in the trilogy. He's probably not what Joshua would be, especially that fight in the UK for a 2-fight deal. So if you were in the Fury camp and betting on Fury, would the motivation factor be just something that you're keeping in mind in your head? Hey, this may not be the best version of Tyson Fury because of the motivation.
Yeah, you raised some good points there. I think the fact that he is talking about retirement, normally we talk about if a fighter is looking past another fighter because he's looking at the bigger fighter on the horizon. This is something different, but he could be kind of looking past Dillian Whyte a little bit in the sense that he's talking about what comes next. So that is something to be a little concerned about. I think we saw in the third Wilder fight a slightly different Fury than we saw in the second Wilder fight, and motivations almost certainly had something to do with that. For the second fight, he really had something to prove. I don't know that he even really wanted to do the third fight. He seemed to be half-assing it a little bit in terms of his interest in the whole thing. He went through with it because they mandated that he had to. And so he went ahead and did the third fight, but he had nothing to prove about the way he matches up with Deontay Wilder at that point, and I think struggled a little more in the fight as a result. Certainly it wasn't as dominant a display as we saw in their second fight. So absolutely, there's a chance that, not that Dillian Whyte is the kind of soft touch that you would expect him to overlook, but the notion that he might not be 100% motivated for this fight, might not be as up for it as he was for the first 2 Wilder fights, the Klitschko fight. As you said, this is not on paper a defining fight of his career, and therefore absolutely the chance of a little bit of a letdown. His weight suggests to me that he didn't slack off in training. He's not overlooking it from that aspect, but still, is he as fully mentally engaged in this fight as he has been for his very best performances? I guess we'll see, but there is reason to be a little bit skeptical of that.
And then that actually leads me into my next question. We're talking about how motivated Fury is for this fight. We're not really going to know for sure until tomorrow night. But something you wrote about on usbets.com is how Fury is prone to lapses, right? Mental lapses. He's been knocked down a few times in big spots. Now, he's, to his credit, he's always gotten back up. He's undefeated. But I like the way you termed it. You said price shopping for props. And I think that's the key here. Obviously, if you're looking to make a play. Now, we talked about the numbers for Fury getting a KO in rounds 1 through 6 or 7 through 12. You can get a pretty good price for those. In some books, you can get plus 240 for 7 through 12 for Fury to get a KO. And if you look at the way he's trending, I mean, the last 2 knockouts of Wilder were in that 7 to 12 range. We talked about the Otto Wallin fight. I mean, that fight went the distance. It wasn't a KO, but it did go the distance. So getting rounds in before the knockout happens is definitely possible. But we are making the case in a way, like we always do, a little bit for the things that could go right for Dillian Whyte, right? We're talking about Fury not being totally up for this fight. who knows? This is all speculation, but this is why we have the conversation. So if you look at Whyte by KO, there's some books that have that as in rounds 1 through 6 at plus 1,600, 7 to 12 plus 1,300. And then there's also something that you wrote about. Both fighters to score knockdowns is as high as plus 500 in certain places. And if you look at the way that Tyson Fury fights, we mentioned Cunningham, he got up off the floor. Deontay Wilder in the third fight, he got up off the canvas. The first fight versus Wilder, he got up off the canvas. So he does go down, pops right back up. And if he is to win by knockout, that both fighters scoring a knockdown bet becomes a lot more appealing. So any value there in the Whyte KO props or the both guys scoring knockdown props in your mind?
Possibly. I view those more as bets you're making for fun, to give yourself a fun sweat where it doesn't cost you much. What was it? I think 16 to 1 on the
1 through 6.
Whyte in the first half. Right. Yep. So if you wanted to make that bet, for instance, risk $10 to win 160, and you've got yourself this really fun sweat for the first half of the fight. The same with both fighters knocked down. Is it likely to happen? No, that's why it's priced at 5 to 1, but it could happen for all the reasons that you said about the knockdowns that we've seen Tyson Fury suffer. So that's another real fun one. Those are the kind of bets where you don't want to invest your whole bankroll in it. You want to put a few bucks in and see if you can get a whole lot of money out. And so I don't know that there's quite value in any of those, because I'm not fully a believer that Dillian Whyte is going to pull this off. But those are fun ones to take him, or just Whyte to win by knockout period is something to consider. As long as you're going to bet on Whyte, chances are it would be a knockout, not a decision that he wins by. So yeah, there are a few interesting ones there. And actually, you got me thinking a little bit with the questioning of Fury's motivation, that could blow up all of my bets, because if he's a little bit less motivated, what we might see is something more like the Otto Wallin fight, where it goes the distance. He doesn't get him out of there. He's content to just, I've got a big lead. Let's just get to the finish line here. In which case, all of my knockout bets don't pay out.
We shall see what happens. I mean, there's so many question marks, and we're going to find out what happens tomorrow night. Just to close out that main event, Fury versus Whyte. You talked about some of the plays that you're making. This fight, I mean, in terms of what it could be for Tyson Fury, I mean, it could be life-changing for Dillian Whyte. He's 34 years old. This could mean everything for him. But at the same time, this is boxing, and we never know what's going to happen. And part of it, too, was that Whyte wasn't even fully engaged with this whole promotion. He felt like he wasn't being treated fairly at certain points. He didn't show up to early press conferences. He's there now. But who knows how that affected training early on. Again, this is all just speculation, and we're all trying to just take all the information we can and figure out, the best way to assess what may happen. So to put you on the spot a little bit, you talked about some of your plays, but if you were to give a definitive pick of what's going to happen between Fury and Whyte in this main event, your official prediction would be what?
I think I'd go something along the lines of Fury KO 8, somewhere again, a little bit past that midway point that Dillian Whyte starts to wear down. We've seen him occasionally get winded. Yes, and this is certainly Tyson Fury can wear an opponent out both physically and mentally. We saw Deontay Wilder looking just exhausted at a certain point in their third fight. So I could see something like that, where it's close, it's competitive. They're both having some good moments the first few rounds. And then Fury starts really taking over, and Whyte doesn't know what to do with him, and Fury gets him out of there around about round 8. If I had to, if you had to do one of those bets where you just pick one round and take a flyer on it, that'd be the one I'd go with.
That's always fun, right? That's like playing roulette. Just pick that round and
that's basically what it is. Yep. You don't expect to win those, but every now and then you do win one, and it pays off on all the ones that lost.
Well, it should be an exciting fight for as long as it lasts. We love heavyweight championship boxing. And I think I'm in the camp of, we know boxers retire all the time to only come out of retirement. So no reason to think that won't happen for Tyson Fury, but we shall see. One last question before I let you go. I wanted to just look ahead at the schedule here, get your thoughts. If there's anything that sticks out to you as a fight that may have a potential spot for value. I was just looking through some of the odds and some of the fights coming up. There are a few fights that are closer than others. Serrano versus Taylor is a mega fight, especially for women's boxing to be headlining in Madison Square Garden. That's a tremendous event. It's been a long time coming for an event of that magnitude in terms of women's boxing. And I think we're all glad to see that happening, but it is also a close fight with the odds. Canelo versus Bivol, I think is also interesting because of the weight difference, right? Going up to light heavy. That'll be interesting. And then there's also the thing about how you want to bet Canelo. Do you think, you're betting knockout or not? Those type of things. If Clarissa Shields fights Savannah Marshall, that's another close fight on paper in terms of the odds. And then Usyk Joshua 2, I also think is very, very interesting because of the way Joshua has looked in rematches against Ruiz, right? He was so prepared, so focused. And maybe there is something about it. When he fought Ruiz, he said, hey, I need to box smarter and fight a smarter fight and not engage too much. And that's what he did in the rematch. It's almost like with Usyk, it might be the opposite. He might be like, well, I boxed too much and I need to use my size. And so I'm really interested to see what Joshua does in terms of the way that he comes into that rematch with a different game plan. And with Usyk, obviously everything going on in the world and his what he was, fighting for his country in Ukraine and all of that stuff. I mean, obviously that's going to take a toll on your training and everything that you're going through. So that's going to change his preparation for that fight as well. So those are some fights coming up. I'm just curious if any of those or anything else, any of the fights that stand out to you and say, hey, I might make a play here because of this reason.
Yeah, what's interesting about most of those fights is how closely priced they are, that there is no minus 550 favorite in any of those, except maybe Canelo, because of the Canelo brand name, they price him a little bit higher than maybe he should be. But yeah,
Canelo looks like a minus 430-ish.
Okay, all
plus
right.
300. So yeah.
So it's still a little tighter than Fury Whyte, but it's in that ballpark.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the one that jumps out at me that I did bet nice and early was Serrano and Taylor. It was initially priced at minus 110 both ways, that there was no underdog in that fight, according to the sports books. And I've favored ever so slightly Serrano all along. So I went ahead and bet that. And I also got 2-1 on Serrano by decision specifically, which I do think it's more likely to be a distance fight. It's interesting that the odds have moved a little. It's still unbelievably close for a boxing match. This is none of that minus 4,500 Tommy Fury kind of stuff going on here. She's like minus 130 now, and Taylor's like plus 102. So I do like the Serrano side in that fight, although at minus 130, I'm not sure if there's value anymore like there was when it opened. But that one has my attention. And the other one that is coming up that has really close odds, I don't know exactly what the latest are, but the Charlo Castaño rematch is another one of those fights where nobody should be more than a 2-1 favorite. They should both be in the 100s on that one, I would imagine.
It looks like Charlo minus 130, Castaño plus 104, kind of in that world. Yeah.
So that's basically exactly where Serrano and Taylor is right now, with one just a very slight favorite over the other. So those are the kind of fights I love because we don't get them enough in boxing. We get way too many of these 20-1 favorites, and even Fury Whyte is a good fight, but it's the sort of fight where there is a very clear-cut favorite, certainly. It's fun that coming up on the schedule, we have 3 or 4 of these fights that are really close to coin flips. And so that's Usyk Joshua being another one. So that's great stuff to look forward to on the calendar, certainly, whether you're a fan or a bettor.
Absolutely. And Kambosos Haney, another close one.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, I think it will be interesting to see Serrano Taylor. I was up close seeing Serrano knock out Bermudez with the body shot, and she has power, especially going to the body, but against an opponent as skilled as Katie Taylor with that output, I mean, it's definitely going to be an exciting, interesting fight. And I understand why you bet the decision on that one versus the knockout. But to your point, I mean, it's a good time to be a boxing fan because we have these close matchups, right? That's what we want, right? We want good entertainment, and we want well-matched fights. And that's what we have going forward. And it starts tomorrow with Dillian Whyte versus Tyson Fury. I'm definitely excited to check it out. I may have to do one of those roulette bets we talked about. That seems like the most fun.
Just only bet what you can afford to lose, Curran. That's all I'll say.
Good. Yes. Great reminder as always. Eric Raskin, I want to thank you so much for the time. People can check out your work at usbets.com. They can listen to you on the Showtime Boxing podcast, the Gamble On podcast. Thank you so much for breaking it down, and hope to chat with you again soon, my friend.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Great talking to you, Curran.